Hello, I hope you're doing well. I hope that you're enjoying your time off and you are making the most of it. Hopefully, in my vacation, the activities that I've been doing over the last few days, I'm not dead, and I will see you in a few days. But until then, I'm going to videotape this in order to talk about sexual ethics. That'll be our topic for today. There are certainly there are issues that relate to sexual nature that are moral in and of themselves, issues of justice, if you will, that are related to sex. Things like rape or date rape or molestation, incest, these kinds of things. These are acts that have a sexual element to them, but they're issues of justice also. Issues of crime and so forth. Rape would be one of them. Sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is kind of like human trafficking. It's, but only for the purposes of prostitution and things like that. And so, in sex trafficking, people will kidnap minors, young women, or maybe in some cases young boys. And they will move them across geographic lines in order to escape detection and sell them into the sex trade. Now that has an element of sexuality to it, but in reality, the idea of trafficking is a much more severe thing. The sexual element is only one thing, but it's an issue of justice. Prostitution, many if not all forms of prostitution, people have argued, involve some kind of manipulation, exploitation of the prostitute. One that we have heard about recently, or more recently, that's becoming more of a public awareness thing, is the issue of female genital mutilation, also known as female circumcision. And this is where, oftentimes, in associated with religious practices, it's where in certain areas. The young woman, the young girl, will be taken when many times while she's still a baby, an infant, and the sex organ of the woman, the clitoris, is removed, or some such fashion. The idea there is to try to decrease her sexual urge later in life, so that she remains more faithful to her husband, or something like that. But yeah, female genital mutilation is a practice that is becoming more and more condemned throughout the world today. In most places, it is, in the United States, it is illegal to even do that until the woman is 18 years of age and can give an informed consent. But apart from issues of justice, apart from issues where one person is being harmed sexually, and those are certainly issues to talk about, but they're issues of justice. But apart from those, sex itself is also a moral issue. The act of sex itself. There are deep and abiding questions as to the moral status of sexuality and certain kinds of sexual activity. Now, there are all kinds of sexual activity and all kinds of issues related to that you could investigate, and you could ask questions about the moral status of these acts. Fornication. I'm going to go down through a list of here and maybe just explain a little bit about what some of these acts are. The first one is fornication. And fornication is the act of having sex outside of a marital relationship, a marital arrangement. Adultery. Excuse me. Adultery is when people have sex. When married people have sex out of marriage. Fornication is when typically when people are unmarried and engage in sexual relations, whereas adultery is sexual relations where one or more partners are married but not to the partner who they're having sex with. So that's sort of the difference there. Then there's polyamory. Polyamory means that you have multiple partners, or you love more than one person at once. There's incest. Incest, as we've spoken of at a different point in the term. Incest is when people of close relations have sexual intercourse or sexual relations. Now, incest can be an issue of rape, and so therefore it can be a justice issue, or it also can be consensual. Consensual incest sometimes can happen between people who are closely related, and for whatever reason they become sexually involved. Then there are certain types of acts, masturbation, the act of self-arousal, oral sex, stimulation of the genitals by the mouth or oral in an oral fashion, anal sex. There are homosexual and bisexual practices. There's pedophilia, which is when an adult has sex with a minor. Necrophilia, bestiality. There are all kinds of different sex acts that people can take one by one and ask, okay, are these moral things? And so how are we to tell? Is it enough to say, well, many people would say that as long as the sex act is carried out between two consenting adults, then whatever they do is up to them. That whatever act that they want to get involved in, no matter what it is, as long as they're consenting and it's not harming anyone, then whatever they do is up to them. And for many people, that settles it. I mean, after all, we do prize our freedom. We do prize our ability, our liberty to do what we want. And so this would be a very short class indeed if that's where we settle it. But oh no, we must make things more difficult. Other people will object and say that there are other principles that are involved here that go much more deeper. That go deeper than personal considerations, than personal opinion. What I want to do, or what my partner wants to do, or partners want to do. A lot of people will say this because sex practices affects more than just the people who are involved in the sexual activity itself, but sex practices also involve larger circles of relationships. So, for instance, the case of adultery, two people who are involved in an adulterous relationship, they're not only bringing themselves to the bed, but they're also bringing their spouses, their families, their loved ones, their children, quite possibly, anyone who has a vested interest anyone who has a vested interest in seeing the relationship would remain faithful. So it's going to affect more than just the people who are involved in it. And different acts will do this to certain different extents. And then there are some who will say, not only should we be concerned with the effects of sex acts on relationships around us, and then in general as it multiplies out from that, as it goes out from there, our circles of relationships. But not only that, but some will say, there are certain types of sex acts that are inherently wrong in and of themselves. And so that needs to be taken into consideration whenever the issue of sex ethics comes up. The fact that nearly all cultures have some sort of taboo around sex is a strong indicator that sex is a morally charged issue, no matter where you go. Different cultures have taboos around different acts. Now, those are going to vary from culture to culture. Things are going to be acceptable in one place and not in another. But one thing that we can say that shows is that every culture considers sex to be a moral issue to some degree or another. And so the question becomes, where are those moral demarcations? Where are those the principles around which we govern our sex lives? Those moral principles around where we govern or how we govern our sex life. So anyway, we're going to dive right into that. No pun intended. But we're gonna engage that today on many different bases from our various moral theories. I'll be right back in just a moment. Had to get a drink. So, all right. Well, let's take a look at some different considerations that go into determining whether or not, or sort of hemming in our sex ethic or ethics of sex. The first one I want to consider today is utilitarian. Utilitarian or consequentialist arguments concerning sexuality will first consider the consequences, whether they're good or bad, of a particular sex act, or maybe just an overall sex behavior. And so I want to take a look at a few various kinds of consequences that might be associated. Now, you might be able to think of some other ones. These are just some that I've looked at, I've got from the book, or I have come up with myself. But whenever one wants to know whether, the utilitarian would say, whenever one wants to know whether or not a sex act is good or bad, they would say that that we need to look at the consequences of this act. And there can be all sorts of consequences involved in different kinds of sexual behavior. There can be physical consequences. On the one hand, you've got some of the physical consequences of engaging in risky sexual behavior could mean pregnancy. Some negative consequences would be pregnancy or sexually transmitted disease. It's possible that rape might be involved in that if the behavior itself is enticing to one party or another, and there's no intent to have the sexual relations, it could result in rape. There are other various physical consequences, negative ones whereby a person might be hurt during the act itself. They could be physically hurt during it. This is certainly the possibility in some forms of rough sex or S&M type activity. Possible other physical consequences, though, would be potential ones would be on the good side of it would possibly be physical pleasure. People, I mean, why do people have sex? Right? They do it because it's physically pleasurable. And that's one of the main things that people are trying to get out of sex when they engage in it. Pregnancy could be a positive one as well. People who want children engage in sexual relations in order to have them. And that would be the goal of their physical relationship. But there can be physical consequences on a personal level involved in that. Now, on a personal level, there also can be relational consequences. Sex has a way of bringing people closer together in some instances, but it also has the potential to drive people apart. You see, when there's a commitment there, when there's a stated commitment between partners, and then sex has a context within which to work to bring people closer together. But if there's not a mutual understanding, there's not a stated commitment, then sex is sort of used or seen as a tool to accomplish that. Then oftentimes that will result in people resenting one another after the act, or thinking more lowly of one another. And so whereas before someone might have thought highly of a person after the fact, then that estimation gets changed, and they begin to view the person as maybe an object or something. And so they could have negative impacts on a relationship. It could have positive impacts as well. Not only that, though, but one might ask, what kind of consequences or what kind of effects is this relationship and the sexual activity that I'm being involved with in this relationship, what kind of effects is it going to have on my family and my children or my friends? How are they going to view this, and how is this relationship going to impact those relationships? There could be social consequences on a personal level. Social consequences could involve your reputation. If a person engages in certain sexual activities, then it can either hurt or help. Some people talk about being a stud or a slut, how a person is perceived socially. There's certainly social stigma surrounding certain kind of behaviors depending on where you live and what sort of community you live in. For instance, same-sex attraction has a stigma associated with it in our culture. Now that stigma now is shifting, and whereas people used to view it negatively, in our culture, in our society, people are shifting to the point where that is becoming a more acceptable thing. Cohabitation or the idea of living together, again, that is one of the things that 20, 30 years ago, when two people would live together outside of marriage, it was sort of a stigma thing. People looked at that as as a negative thing in a negative light, and now in culture. Maybe it wouldn't have such dire social consequences. People just sort of accept that, except in certain pockets of the population.